Hey everybody, and welcome to Dear Mr. Potter. I'm Alistair Stevens. In tonight's session, we meet the competition in chapters 15 and 16 of Harry Potter and the Goblet of Fire, Beauxbatons and Durmstrang, and the Goblet of Fire itself, in which we meet the delegations, the representatives of the other two largest wizarding schools in Europe. We get tangled up, again, repeatedly, with Hermione's campaign to free the house elves, and in a moment which is very exciting for the Steven Universe fans in the audience, we get to actually meet a giant woman. Looking forward to discussing that. Welcome to the chat, everyone who has made it here this evening, including a lot of newcomers, a lot of first-timers, a lot of first-years, as Elizabeth has just dubbed them in the chat. Gubbins and Kim and Loppytail and Charlie and Leona and Dumbledore, who wants me to do a one-shot on A Knight's Tale, which was released in, 2000, 2001. The Heath Ledger, Paul Bettany, Alan Tudyk is in that movie. That is a fun, stupid movie that I actually really like. That would be a great topic for a one-shot discussion. So yeah, stay tuned for that. And hello, of course, to our regulars who are all just hanging out. Melissa and Paranel. Paranel, are you joining us for the first time too? And Nikki and Vikati and Leo and Rohit. Guys, it is an absolute pleasure to have you all here. Before we get started, a quick announcement. Over the course of the last 6 weeks, I have been running an in-depth class on the history of fantasy and folklore and fairy tales over at Point North Media called Between Worlds. And now that the live class is concluded, the downloadable version is available right now at pointnorthmedia.com. If you are interested in the history of fantasy and the origins of fairy tales going back to the medieval period, if you're interested in the evolution of these genres and in, the modern challenges that have faced these genres, then you can pick up the class and the a little over, somewhere between 9 and 10 hours of lectures that are associated with the class. Oh, plus the 2-hour live commentary track that I did for the 1999 adaptation of A Midsummer Night's Dream right now at pointnorthmedia.com. And, if you know someone who would like that class, please spread the word, because my phone died today and now I have to buy a new phone. So these minor inconveniences avail us all, and your support is very much appreciated at this difficult time. Okay, with all of that said, we've got a lot of slides to get through tonight, so let's plunge right in with, an odd step. We begin this chapter in a weird place, and these chapters, in fact, let me frame this just a little bit first. These chapters are odd because they include some of the most important elements of this story, but those important elements are shuffled in between a lot of this ordinary subplot action, a lot of this regular life at Hogwarts stuff. The Hermione subplot, the Sirius subplot shows up here as well, but they're kind of shuffled out of order, and it can be difficult to feel your feet under you as you're moving through these chapters, because we get very important things that are presented as very important things, and then we get some very important things that are presented in a fleeting, almost insignificant fashion. For example, we start the chapter like this. Harry did his best not to worry about Sirius over the next couple of weeks. True, he could not stop himself from looking anxiously around every morning when the post owls arrived, nor late at night before he went to sleep, prevent himself from seeing horrible visions of Sirius cornered by Dementors down some dark London street. But between times, he tried to keep his mind off his godfather. He wished he still had Quidditch to distract him. Nothing worked so well on a troubled mind as a good, hard training session. On the other hand, their lessons were becoming more difficult and demanding than ever before, particularly Moody's defense against the dark arts. To their surprise, Professor Moody had announced that he would be putting the Imperius curse on each of them in turn to demonstrate its power and to see whether they could resist its effects. But you said it's illegal, Professor, said Hermione uncertainly as Moody cleared away the desks with a sweep of his wand, leaving a large, clear space in the middle of the room. You said to use it against another human was... Dumbledore wants you taught what it feels like, said Moody, his magical eyes swiveling onto Hermione and fixing her with an eerie, unblinking stare. If you'd rather learn the hard way, when someone's putting it on you so they can control you completely, fine by me. You're excused. Off you go. It is difficult to talk about some of Professor Moody's motivations as we move through this book, of course, because of the nature of his dual identity, which we have not yet spoiled in the course of our discussions, but which has, of course, been alluded to in the course of our discussions. But this is a particularly interesting example because we have to read it flatly. We have to read it superficially, and we know that we are supposed to read this as an intentional piece of narrative construction here, because J.K. Rowling does that thing that she does when she wants the action of the story, the plot of the story, to have that ring of unimpeachable authority. She invokes the name Dumbledore. Dumbledore wants you taught what it feels like, said Moody, his magical eyes swiveling onto Hermione and fixing her with an eerie, unblinking stare. So this is supposed to be taken, I think, literally, despite what we may learn about Moody later on in the book. And I'm curious about this because, of course, the word that Hermione doesn't quite get to, you said to use it against another human was, well, she may be about to say punishable by a lifetime in Azkaban, but probably the word that she's looking for is unforgivable. There are degrees of evil and malice in the Harry Potter universe. We have seen this already. We can understand people who do terrible things for good reasons. We may not support them, we may not condone their actions, but we can at least understand them. We can at least, in the most trivial sense, of course, understand Harry donning his father's invisibility cloak and using the Marauder's map to get out to Hogsmeade during the field trip part of his third year. We can understand that impulse, even though objectively that is both wrong and dangerous. Not just dangerous for Harry, but dangerous in a way that endangers his fellow students and his friends too, of course. Then we can talk about Sirius Black escaping from Azkaban. We can talk about Remus Lupin kind of trying to preserve his role at Hogwarts by taking the Wolfsbane potion brewed for him by Snape, but still being a werewolf nonetheless, and knowing, even as he is there, that he is incredibly dangerous. We understand people doing questionable things for good reasons, but we've never crossed that unforgivable Rubicon before, right? We've never actually engaged with something that has been initially presented to us as unforgivably dark. But here we're doing it deliberately. Here we're training these students. Here we're exposing them to what the Imperius curse can actually be. In fact, let's move on and we'll see exactly how it feels, because it turns out it may not feel that bad after all. As I try and catch up with the chat that's having a little trouble scrolling here. Yes, good. Potter, Moody growled. You next. Harry moved forward into the middle of the classroom, into the space that Moody had cleared of desks. Moody raised his wand, pointed it at Harry, and said, Imperio! It was the most wonderful feeling. Harry felt a floating sensation as though every thought and worry in his head was wiped gently away, leaving nothing but a vague, untraceable happiness. He stood there feeling immensely relaxed, only dimly aware of everyone watching him. And then he heard Mad-Eye Moody's voice, echoing in some distant chamber of his empty brain. Jump onto the desk. Jump onto the desk. Harry bent his knees obediently, preparing to spring. Jump onto the desk. Why, though? Another voice had awoken in the back of his brain. Stupid thing to do, really, said the voice. Jump onto the desk. No, I don't think I will, thanks, said the other voice a little more firmly. No, I don't really want to. Jump! Now! The next thing Harry felt was considerable pain. He had both jumped and tried to prevent himself from jumping. The result was that he'd smashed headlong into the desk, knocking it over, and by the feeling in his legs, fractured both of his kneecaps. Now that's more like it, growled Moody's voice, and suddenly Harry felt the empty, echoing feeling inside his head disappear. He remembered exactly what was happening, and the pain in his knees seemed to double. Look at that, you lot. Potter fought. He fought it and he damn near beat it. We'll try that again, Potter, and the rest of you pay attention. Watch his eyes. That's where you'll see it. Very good, Potter. Very good indeed. They'll have trouble controlling you. The presence of a second voice contained within Harry is absolutely fascinating. We, again, must resist the urge to skip ahead in our understanding of the narrative. We must preserve our opportunity to speculate about that second voice and the identity of that second voice for a time that is more appropriate, for a time in which we have more data points to discuss. Right now, we know that this voice is emergent from Harry. Moody doesn't seem to recognize that there is any discordant presence within Harry. Thus, we may as well speculate that this is Harry's voice. And ultimately, too, of course, that is legitimate speculation on what's happening here. What is the nature of the second voice? Well, I think in order to understand the nature of the second voice, we have to understand the nature of the first voice and the battle that is being fought here within Harry under the influence of the Imperio curse. He heard Mad-Eye Moody's voice echoing in some distant chamber of his empty brain. Jump onto the desk, jump onto the desk. It's crucial that it's Moody's voice. This is not being presented to Harry as a simulacrum, as a representation of his own innate instinct. He's aware, even as he is beginning to obey and then fighting the urge to obey this voice, that it is not his voice. He knows exactly where it is coming from, and yet it feels compulsive. Yet it feels as though it carries that weight of authority. And it's interesting that we have this clearing of the classroom, right? This surprisingly forcible use of magic from Moody, an absolutely appropriate use of magic for Moody, but a surprisingly forcible use of magic by Moody within the frame of Rowling's narrative here. This sweep of his wand with which he clears this open space in the middle of the classroom in which these battles, these conflicts, these challenges will take place. And then he does something very similar to Harry's mind, of course. He casts the Imperio charm, and it was the Imperio curse, I should say, and it was the most wonderful feeling. Harry felt a floating sensation as though every thought and worry in his head was wiped gently away, leaving nothing but a vague, untraceable happiness. Harry is cleansed in a way, but in a more powerful way, space is made within Harry for the conflict to occur. It's not that he is blissfully happy. It's not that he is fiercely joyous. It's not that he is absolutely compelled by this voice which enters into him. It is that he is neutral. I mean, a positive, buoyant kind of neutral, but broadly neutral. And then this voice encroaches, and the other voice responds, crucially from the back of his brain, right? Then he heard Mad-Eye Moody's voice echoing in some distant chamber of his empty brain, jump onto the desk, and he prepares to do so. Why, though? Another voice had awoken in the back of his brain. Stupid thing to do, really, said the voice. Jump onto the desk. No, I don't think I will, thanks, said the other voice a little more firmly. No, I don't really want to. This rising conflict here forces an incomplete obedience in Harry. It is not the case that he defeats the influential voice, the voice belonging to Moody under the influence of the Imperio curse, or that he succumbs to the curse. Neither voice wins. They are engaged in such equal conflict that Harry crashes into the desk, right? This conflict is not resolved, so his obedience is imperfect. And that use of positive and negative impulses, that use of specifically the voice of constraint and command and the voice of rebellion and freedom, right? That's the frame that we get of the voice. And it has been noted, of course, that this voice sounds a little like Hermione. It doesn't sound unlike Hermione, at least. Why, though? Stupid thing to do, really, right? This is Hermione's kind of somewhat sniffy, oh, really? That's what we're going to do? Kind of perspective on events. So we get this voice of command and this voice of what is primarily rebellion. And these two things, without either being fully manifested, without either being fully victorious, result in a crashing compromise as Harry strikes the desk. And we must now wonder about the Imperius curse, right? It's obviously being wielded at a very low level by Moody, though that too raises all kinds of questions about how curses work within the frame of the Harry Potter story. We've talked about the intent, about the will that has to underlie the magical act, the desire to cast the spell that actually seems to generate energy for the spell. The more you want the thing, the more powerful the spell will be, and the more likely you will be to cast it perfectly, to cast it well, to cast it appropriately. And it seems as though Moody is holding himself in check here, that he is giving a very minor version of the spell. And of course, now we know, because it doesn't feel like you're being puppeteered, because it doesn't feel like you're being overwhelmed, because it doesn't feel like the seductive whisper of the One Ring in The Lord of the Rings, for example. Now we know what it feels like. It feels like happiness and a helpful voice, just advising you what you ought to do, and a natural inclination to obey. Let me see here as I catch up. Oh, interesting. Rohit says, it's never really discussed later, but I wonder if after this, part of Harry remembers this feeling with nostalgia. After a lifetime of danger and worry, maybe the initial feeling the Imperius curse creates in you is welcome to him. That is an interesting thought, isn't it? That's, I'm most interested, I suppose, in this warm, vague, general kind of happiness versus the defiant, bright hope of the Patronus charm in its conflict against the influence of the Dementors, in its conflict against hopelessness in general, evil in general, right? Pretty thoroughly up until this point in the book, in the series, we've established magical conflicts as being possessed of a certain high emotional register, right? We feel intensely about things at moments of magical conflict in particular. This is kind of the opposite. And that may be why the Imperius curse is just so dangerous, so lethal. Yeah, good. Let me see. Yes, Spatula McGrady observing, conforming as always, feels like the easy route. Of course it does. Yes. Which does raise an interesting question about the predisposition of different houses. There's no reason to believe, I think, that Mad-Eye Moody is only training the Gryffindor kids in this particular form of curse, but you kind of got to feel like the Hufflepuff class goes a little differently, right? Hey, Hufflepuff, you should feel warm and nice and kind of gentle and maybe jump on the table. And the Hufflepuffs are, yeah, okay, if that's what you want, sure. Hufflepuff's probably a little more susceptible to the Imperius curse than other schools, other houses at Hogwarts. Yeah, good. Interesting. Rahit continues. There may be something to the fact that Harry, more than his classmates, has had experiences that makes him question so-called authority rather than taking them at their word. This is a really powerful idea, I think. And not just experiences, though absolutely he has had definitive experiences, not least of all his entire interaction with Sirius, right? He has been forced into a position where he is questioning the authoritarian structures of the wizarding world more freely and more directly than pretty much anyone else at Hogwarts. But of course, that was also page 1 of Harry's Hogwarts experience. He shows up and has a different relationship with this school than all of the other kids, a different relationship even than Ron and Hermione, who are, by virtue of proximity at least, most similar to Harry in their experience of this school. Harry is exceptional. He gets to break the rules. The rules don't always completely apply to him. So that innate and instinctive kind of rebellion, that rebellion by virtue of excellence, is absolutely crucial to our understanding of Harry. Yeah. And it's not just that he wants to fight against it, but rather that he oh gosh, how can I put this? It's not just the desire to fight, it's the lack of recognition that there is a fight, right? Harry is simply less bound by the rules than anyone else. So when an agency, a force, a compulsion is laid upon him to do anything, Harry is naturally, I think, going to be more resistant to it than other people. As I say that, we'll be able to pull this out. Rohit is correcting me. That was Ramya who said that. I do apologize. You guys have very similar little icons here in the chat, very similar little purple icons, and I always catch that. I always mistake the two. I do apologize. Excellent. All right. Yeah, exactly, right. Vic also observing one of the fonts of Harry's exceptionalism is that Harry just doesn't know the limits. Okay, it's 20 after 9, and I definitely can't do a 20-minute tangent on this, but this is a really powerful idea that we will absolutely definitively have the opportunity to discuss within the frame of Order of the Phoenix, I think, and to a lesser extent, though arguably a more nuanced extent, in the Half-Blood Prince. To be ignorant of the rules is to be open to possibility, is to be limitless in your ambition, right? To be unwise in that very worldly sense is to be possessed of enormous potential. There is a really interesting conflict within the frame of Harry Potter vis-a-vis knowledge and ignorance and the powers afforded to each, or the sources of power from which each springs. We'll definitely talk about that as we move forward. But yes, I think that point, Vikati, that Harry didn't grow up knowing the rules. He hasn't internalized the structures, or at least by the time that he was internalizing the structures of the wizarding world, let alone Hogwarts, he was already in his adolescent rebellion phase. So the rules are a little different for him. Good. Michelle Schultz is joining us after a half hour of complicated difficulty. I do apologize. Oh no. Yeah, we had a little technical trouble last night. I'm calling this out as Loopy Tail is saying that, hey, I moved to a computer. Crowdcast didn't work well on mobile. It has in the past. We did run into some trouble last night in the final session of the Between Worlds class. So I hope that we'll make it through the rest of the session without. Any terrible. Oh, L'Hôpital. Oh, I do apologize. See, part of the problem here is just that the Crowdcast chat is so very far away from where I am right now. So let me shrink that window down so I can see you all a little more closely. Excellent. All right. Let's keep pushing on, shall we? Okay, so we have tested the Imperius curse and we have found that Harry is innately resistant. Let's pay attention to that. Look at that, you lot. Potter fought. He fought it and he damn near beat it. We'll try that again, Potter, and the rest of you pay attention. Watch his eyes. And that's where you see it. Very good, Potter. Very good indeed. They'll have trouble controlling you. Not, you'll note, they won't be able to control you, but it will at least cause them an intermittent difficulty trying to control you, Harry. Hope that's okay. Hope that's all right. And of course, we're calling out to watch his eyes. That's where you'll see it. That's where you'll see the spark of rebellion. And it's interesting that Mad Eye Moody, of all people, should be calling that out. So weeks pass and we jump the tracks from a relatively minor subplot at this point in the book into our A plot, right? We are back now with the Triwizard Tournament. When they arrived, I should say too, because I haven't really been calling it out, but we've been doing the slow burn plot here of Sirius Black coming to Hogwarts. Harry had written to him originally about his scar hurting, and then he received the notification saying that Dumbledore at least was reading the signs and he was on his way. And now Harry is concerned, so Harry has responded to him and said, no, actually, I'm fine and my scar didn't hurt. And Hermione is outraged that he lied about it. We'll keep that on a low burn there, just a low roiling bubble right at the back of the stove, and we'll come back to that in due course. When they arrived in the entrance hall, they found themselves unable to proceed owing to the large crowd of students congregated there, all milling around a large sign that had been erected at the foot of the marble staircase. Ron, the tallest of the three, stood on tiptoe to see over the heads in front of them and read the sign aloud to the other two. Triwizard Tournament. The delegations from Beauxbatons and Durmstrang will be arriving at 6 o'clock on Friday the 30th of October. Lessons will end half an hour early. Brilliant, said Harry. It's potions lessoning on Friday. Snape won't have time to poison us all. Students will return their Students will return their bags and books to their dormitories and assemble in front of the castle to greet our guests before the welcoming feast. Only a week away, said Ernie Macmillan of Hufflepuff, emerging from the crowd, his eyes gleaming. I wonder if Cedric knows. I think I'll go tell him. Cedric, said Ron blankly as Ernie hurried off. Diggory, said Harry. He must be entering the tournament. An idiot, Hogwarts champion, said Ron as they pushed their way through the chattering crowd toward the staircase. He's not an idiot. You just don't like him because he beat Gryffindor at Quidditch, said Hermione. I've heard he's a really good student and he's a prefect. You only like him because he's... She spoke as though this settled the matter. You only like him because he's handsome, said Ron scathingly. Excuse me, I don't like people just because they're handsome, said Hermione indignantly. Ron gave a loud false cough, which sounded oddly like Lockhart. Nice callback there for those of us who have been paying attention through the whole series. We may have forgotten the degree to which Hermione was immediately enchanted by one Gilderoy Lockhart back in the pages of Chamber of Secrets, but Ron has not. So we're calling up again here the tension between the Gryffindor kids, I suppose, but particularly the sports-oriented Gryffindor kids, right? It is not flatly true to say that all Gryffindor kids are scathingly skeptical of that idiot Cedric Diggory because of the Hufflepuff victory over Gryffindor last year. Hermione isn't, and Harry broadly isn't. Fred and George, though, absolutely. Ron, absolutely. You know, Lee, I think, is credited with a certain amount of skepticism regarding Cedric Diggory too. But we're not quite drawing that hard dividing line. This is not a conflict just about House. This is not a conflict just about our selected and chosen identities within the frame of Hogwarts. It's about something more manifest and present than that. If Cedric Diggory hadn't beaten Gryffindor last year, if Hufflepuff hadn't beaten Gryffindor last year, then it's entirely possible that the Weasley boys would have been enormously supportive of Cedric Diggory as a potential Hogwarts champion in the Triwizard Tournament. Leon is saying here in the chat, at least Hogwarts isn't a dull school. There's always something to keep you on your toes. Wow, yes, no kidding. And Corporeal's calling out, Ron consistently objecting to men Hermione is attracted to. Yes. He doesn't seem to be conscious of that yet, but it is a consistent element in his characterization, yes. And of course, will also become more manifest and more immediately pressing as we move forward through this book and subsequent books too, yeah. Oh, that's interesting. Spencer McGrady says, realistic given the classification of Hufflepuff that no one has faith in a member of that house. Huh. I'm not sure that I would co-sign that. I'm not sure that I would agree with that, Spencer McGrady. I think that there are virtues associated. Look, Hufflepuff is the most virtuous house, right? It is the most transparently virtuous house. It is the least complexly virtuous house. Bravery is complicated, and the actual virtue of bravery can be found in something of a happy medium between cowardice and recklessness, right? The same is true for Slytherin, obviously, for mechanical reasons. Like, there is a virtuous kind of ambition and pride found between the complete abrogation of identity and responsibility and purpose in the world and this megalomaniacal, tyrannical desire to take over everything. Slytherin maybe skews a little toward the latter, in my opinion, and in the opinion of many people reading the books. But still, there is a virtue to be found in the median there, and the same is true of Ravenclaw. Is the same true of Hufflepuff? Well, we've talked before about the degrees to which these different houses go bad, right? How exactly these houses manifest dark wizards. We know that Slytherin manifests more dark wizards than any other house, and by some accounts more than all the other houses put together, which seems pretty obvious, actually. And we can speculate easily about how a Gryffindor might fall into darkness or how a Ravenclaw might fall into darkness. But Hufflepuffs are a little more complicated, and their innate goodness, right? Their loyalty, their toil, their kind of softer heroism, their sense of community. If we're going to be skeptical about a Hufflepuff hero, a Hufflepuff champion for the Triwizard Tournament, it is in that Hufflepuff reliance upon prioritization of celebration of community. That seems to me to be the most troublesome part of the Hufflepuff character as it's presented to us in this book within the frame of the Triwizard Tournament, right? That is a wonderful and joyous and virtuous thing in the real world, even within the frame of Hogwarts too, but it doesn't make for singularly exceptional heroes in the, I don't know, man, if there was only someone in this school who was used to stepping up and taking action. Oh, like Harry, for example, right? That's what Gryffindors are for. Hufflepuffs, not so much. But I think that their hard work and their integrity and their willingness to play by the rules and to get it done, I'm not sure that if not for the defeat of the Gryffindor Quidditch team, that these other Gryffindor kids would be quite so skeptical of Cedric Diggory, particularly. Ron, though, yes, I think you're right, because he's handsome. Yes, good. Joseph says, and this is a question I have thought a great deal about, I wonder how much the lack of taking Hufflepuff seriously is just the name. Like 70%? Yeah, like at least 70%, I would say. Hufflepuff, you guys, it is a bad name. It's difficult to take Hufflepuff. Gryffindor, Slytherin, Ravenclaw, Jigglypuff. Like, not maybe as strong and as profound as we might want. Like, rename Hufflepuff Lionheart, and all of a sudden, oh, okay, Cedric Diggory of Lionheart House? Hell yeah, I'm into that guy. He's awesome. Hufflepuff, little different. And I do think that again is part of this, developing sense of these schoolhouses, right? There's very little of this in the first two books. There's a trace of this in the third book, but, well, I suppose there is a trace of this in the second book too. But really, it's at this point that we start to understand in their fullest sense what the houses are and what they are for here. Yeah. Good. Okay. The Fighting Badgers, right? No, that's great, Spatula McGrady. Absolutely. Rename it the Fighting Badgers. I'm into that. Good. Oh, JY is asking, isn't Jigglypuff a Pokemon name? Yeah, Jigglypuff is a Pokemon name. I'm sorry. Sometimes I let my dorkiness show here on the live podcast here as I spent a couple hours a week talking about Harry Potter. Yes, yes. Gobbin says, Hufflepuff is one of those things that always reminds me, oh yeah, this is meant to be a series for kids. Yeah. And Nikki's saying, wouldn't it have to be Badgery? You're right. Yeah, yes. The Hell Badgers, right? Yes, that actually works. Gryffindor, Slytherin, Ravenclaw, and Hell Badger. Yeah, I'm into that. That gives us a strong sense of what these characters are capable of. Okay, wow, we are not making as much progress as I would like. Okay, so we have established the imminent arrival of the delegations from Beauxbatons and from Durmstrang. We'll see those actually in just a few minutes' time. But first, we have to segue again, right? We've just crashed back into the A-plot, and now we're ducking out of it again for some minor Hogwartsery, I suppose, just a little, juvenile political discourse here from Hermione. Wonder what the tasks are going to be, said Ron thoughtfully. I bet we could do them, Harry. We've done dangerous stuff before. Not in front of a panel of judges, you haven't, said Fred. McGonagall says the champions get awarded points according to how well they've done the tasks. Who are the judges? Harry asked. Well, the heads of the participating schools are always on the panel, said Hermione, and everyone looked around at her rather surprised, because all three of them were injured during the tournament of 1792, when a cockatrice the champions were supposed to be catching went on the rampage. She noticed them all looking at her, and with her usual air of impatience that nobody else had read all the books she had said, it's all in Hogwarts, a History. Though, of course, that book's not entirely reliable. A revised history of Hogwarts would be a more accurate title, or a highly biased and selective history of Hogwarts, which glosses over the nastier aspects of the school. What are you on about? Said Ron, though Harry thought he knew what was coming. House elves, said Hermione, her eyes flashing. Not once in over 1,000 pages does Hogwarts, a History mention that we are all colluding in the oppression of 100 slaves. 100 is a really interesting and specific number there. Hermione is continuing her journey onward into her adolescent political rebellion, right? It's entirely appropriate, entirely natural, but also tone deaf, also insensitive. I just wanted to pin this, I suppose, and circle back around to it when we get the brief scene with Hagrid later, particularly since we're already running over time. Let's catch up here. Yeah, Melissa says Hermione is the last person beside Binns to have read a history of Hogwarts. Very good. Yes, yes. And Elizabeth pointing out the SPEW plotline is so very weird and problematic. Yes. Spatula McGrady suggesting Hogwarts: A History Volume 2 by Hermione Granger. I'm kind of into that. Yes, that's very good. Oh, and Ramya has changed her icon. Thank you so much, Ramya. I appreciate that. These little icons, I love how they work here. But yeah, as a visual shorthand, because you guys are so chatty and conversational here in the chat, as a visual shorthand, I just rely on the icons. And when there are a couple that are very similar, sometimes it can be enough to throw me off. Yeah, good. Nikki asking, how do I get my chat feed to automatically scroll to the end? You just cross your fingers. You just cross your fingers and say a small incantation and hope that it works. Yeah, Crowdcast is going through some troubles this week, you guys. I do apologize for it. I do apologize for that. And we're getting some trouble here. Yeah, both Elizabeth and Becca saying that they're having trouble changing their icons. I will look into that and see if I can make that happen. Good. All right. Let's yes, Katie calling out, this storyline doesn't really go anywhere, right? It's been so long since I read these. I don't want to jump ahead to the end of the SPEW storyline, but broadly, yes, broadly. And this is part of the problem, is that Hermione is making an unsophisticated point, but it is at least a well-intentioned point. The problem, or gosh, one of the problems of the SPEW storyline is that it is treated like a joke. It is treated like a comedic subplot, which is enormously problematic when the story itself is talking about slavery. When you're engaging in that kind of rhetoric, when you're touching upon those kind of subjects, when you are crudely co-opting actual language that has been used by advocates of slavery within the 20th century, let alone like older conversations about these subjects, but within the 20th century, you have to be more responsible than this. And Rowling isn't. So there are other problems too, as we mentioned right at the end of last week's session, and as we will continue to mention going forward. As I said, we've got a slide with Hagrid coming up in the near future, so we'll get to all of that. In fact, let's do a little more about elves, and we'll talk about Sirius's response. Ron now rolled his eyes at the ceiling, which was flooding them all in autumn sunlight, and Fred became extremely interested in his bacon. Both twins had refused to buy an SPEW badge. George, however, leaned in toward Hermione. Listen, have you ever been down in the kitchens, Hermione? No, of course not, said Hermione curtly. I hardly think students are supposed to. Well, we have, said George, indicating Fred, lots of times to nick food, and we've met them, and they're happy. They think they got the best job in the world. That's because they're uneducated and brainwashed, Hermione began hotly, but her next few words were drowned out by the sudden whooshing noise from overhead, which announced the arrival of the post owls. Harry looked up at once and saw Hedwig soaring toward him. Hermione stopped talking abruptly. She and Ron watched Hedwig anxiously as she fluttered down onto Harry's shoulder, folded her wings, and held out her leg wearily. Harry pulled off Sirius's reply and offered Hedwig his bacon rinds, which she ate gratefully. Then, checking that Fred and George were safely immersed in further discussions about the Triwizard Tournament, Harry read out Sirius's letter in a whisper to Ron and Hermione. Nice try, Harry. I'm back in the country and well hidden. I want you to keep me posted on everything that's going on at Hogwarts. Don't use Hedwig. Keep changing owls and don't worry about me. Just watch out for yourself. Don't forget what I said about your scar. Sirius. Sirius, not in any way confused by Harry's strategy here, Harry's courageous stratagem to try and keep him away from Hogwarts. No, it turns out that actually adults can occasionally be on your level, Harry. This is one of the more problematic elements in the SPEW storyline, and we are obliged, I think, to call it out, lest in the absence of discussion, we somehow condone this perspective from Hermione. Hermione's, again, unsophisticated but well-intentioned seizing of the high ground here, seizing of a kind of moral and legalistic superiority over the house elves is very dubious, is open to all kinds of assaults, philosophical and logical and legal assaults here. It is bad politics. It is bad allyship, right? This is bad alliance here from Hermione. She is not listening to these people. She's not listening to the individuals that she purports to represent, which doesn't necessarily mean that she should sanction the behavior that's taking place at Hogwarts, but that she should be at least more sensitive, that she should strive to be an ally more than a leader in this space, particularly if you're going to lean on arguments like that's because they're uneducated and brainwashed. Diminishing I was going to say humanity, won't say humanity, will say instead sapience of the house elves here. Diminishing the individuality and identity of the house elves here is incredibly problematic. She is now absolutely asserting that she knows better than they do about their lives and their situations, and that is a kind of political discourse which never, ever ends well. you guys. All right. That, I think, is probably enough discussion of SPEW for the moment. Let's start talking about Beauxbatons, shall we? Something large, much larger than a broomstick, or indeed 100 broomsticks, was hurtling across the deep blue sky toward the castle, growing larger all the time. "It's a dragon!" shrieked one of the first years, losing her head completely. "Don't be stupid! It's a flying house!" said Dennis Creevy. Dennis's guess was closer. As the gigantic black shape skimmed over the treetops of the Forbidden Forest and the lights shining from the castle windows hit it, they saw a gigantic powder blue horse-drawn carriage, the size of a large house, soaring toward them, pulled through the air by a dozen winged horses, all palominos and each the size of an elephant. The front 3 rows of students drew backward as the carriage hurtled ever lower, coming into land at a tremendous speed. Then, with an almighty crash that made Neville jump backward onto a Slytherin 5th year's foot, the horse's hooves, larger than dinner plates, hit the ground. A second later, the carriage landed too, bouncing upon its vast wheels, while the golden horses tossed their enormous heads and rolled large, fiery red eyes. Harry had just enough time to see the door of the carriage bore a coat of arms, 2 crossed golden wands, each emitting 3 stars, before it opened. A boy in pale blue robes jumped down from the carriage, bent forward, fumbled for a moment with something on the carriage floor, and unfolded a set of golden steps. He sprang back respectfully. Then Harry saw a shining, high-heeled black shoe emerging from the inside of the carriage. A shoe the size of a child's sled, followed almost immediately by the largest woman he had ever seen in his life. The size of the carriage and of the horses was immediately explained. A few people gasped. So we're going to be able to talk more fully about the intentional contrast here between Beauxbatons and Durmstrang when the Durmstrang kids arrive, right? We're very close to that, so I'll preserve most of our discussion of the contrast for that slide, which is coming up in just a few minutes, but we can already begin to collect data about Beauxbatons here, right? We should say first, I suppose, that Beauxbatons is a roughly crudely anglicized form of the French phrase beau bâton, right? We're just transliterating the French into a more amenable English form here, which would be literally translated as beautiful sticks, but beautiful sticks in the sense of staves, right? So Beauxbatons is the beautiful staves. That's what we're getting here. Not wand, interestingly, because baguette would be used for wand colloquially in French. So yes, that is what Beauxbatons means. And we are, of course, immediately connected. Okay, let me prime the pump for this because we're going to be talking very specifically about this when we move to Durmstrang. There is a narrative about these houses, these schools, which suggests that Beauxbatons is entirely female and that Durmstrang is entirely male. This is the adaptive choice that was made in the movie, right? All of the Beauxbatons students, all of the pupils at the school, all of the kids at this school are girls, and from Durmstrang, they are all boys. So we're splitting the masculine and the feminine. That is not true in the book. We know for sure that there are boys in attendance, not just at Beauxbatons, but actually as a part of this delegation. And we know for sure that there is at least one girl in the Durmstrang delegation. I'll show you the excerpt, including that little detail later, because it's part of the confrontation with Mad Eye Moody, and it's not like I'm going to skip over that. But that doesn't mean recognizing that these are co-ed schools does not mean that we're not playing into these ideas of romantic, like capital R, romantic Western European femininity and kind of stern and austere Eastern European or Slavic masculinity, right? We're clearly drawing that distinction, and it's disingenuous to suggest otherwise. How do the Beauxbatons kids arrive at Hogwarts? Why, in a powder blue horse-drawn coach floating through the air majestically and gorgeously, and when the stairs are pulled out, well, of course they're golden. What else would they be? We're absolutely leaning into a powerfully feminine ideal here, and it's a powerfully feminine ideal that is completely consistent with all of the characters that we get from Beauxbatons later in the course of the books, most notably, of course, Fleur Delacour, who is going to show up in just a few pages' time, and who is, I know, beloved of one Becca Eller right here in the chat, and of whom I am very fond myself. I dare say we'll talk about her introduction in just a minute. So we do absolutely get the representation of femininity here. C-Star is quoting from Pottermore here. This is interesting. Beauxbatons Academy of Magic, in French Académie de Magie Beauxbatons, is the French wizarding school located in the Pyrenees Mountains of southern France. The school takes many of its students from France, as well as large numbers from Spain, Portugal, the Netherlands, Luxembourg, and Belgium. It's unknown if students from other countries are allowed. So look at that geographical spread there, right? This is absolutely romantic Western Europe. It's France and it's Spain and it's Portugal and the Netherlands and Luxembourg and Belgium. I'm very surprised actually that Italy isn't included, because Italy was of course the primary inspiration of that kind of Dauphin, court of the Sun King kind of French Renaissance perspective on opulent femininity, which seems to be completely consistent with what we get from Beauxbatons. There's something about just the combination of powder blue and gold, right, that evokes exactly that spirit and that aesthetic. That's gorgeous, C-Star. Thank you for pulling that there. Yeah. Okay, good. I still accept the film canon, says JY, that Beauxbatons and Durmstrang have acrobatics and martial arts clubs, though. Yeah, no, I get that. Good. Okay. Yeah, Joseph calling out too, right? It's a very English take on French femininity. Yes. Joseph, you're absolutely right to clarify this. This is not, I don't even think purporting to represent actual French femininity. It is representing instead mythic French femininity, right? This is the French femininity which gives us, gorgeously shabby and yet still opulent Parisian apartments where it's always either 4 o'clock in the afternoon or 10 o'clock at night, right? And we're always sipping coffee and having elegant, crystalline, witty conversations, right? It's not really France, but it's the myth of France in exactly the same way as Durmstrang is not from wherever Durmstrang actually is. Like, I don't think we get, has Pottermore even confirmed where Durmstrang is? Like, it's somewhere in the frozen north. We know that it is in Europe, so that it's not probably actually Russia, right? Like, probably not one of the former Soviet states or Russia itself. Though I guess this being set in 1994 complicates that matter somewhat. It's not one of those states. It is somewhere in Europe, because we know that it is one of the 3 largest European wizarding schools. So probably, yeah, Finland, Norway, Scandinavia in some sense, Sweden perhaps. Yeah, I'm not entirely sure, but somewhere northern, because they appear wearing their furs, which is of course very masculine too. So we're not talking about real France, and we're not talking about real French women and how they may or may not get fat. Terrible book, never mind. We're not talking about real French femininity. We're talking about the myth of French femininity, and we're not talking about, again, not even specifically French, but like romantic femininity. And we're not talking about Eastern European or Slavic or Norse masculinity. We're talking about the myth of that kind of masculinity. Those are the reference points for these extended metaphors here. Yeah. Good. Okay, let me catch up. Yes, Ron calling out, it's interesting to note that even though their aesthetic seems dainty and graceful, their head of school is somewhat unexpectedly large rather than diminutive. This is a really interesting element that I'm utterly charmed by, and it plays into that idea that there is a special class of character contained within the world of Harry Potter who is rendered virtuous because of their inhumanity, because of their non-humanity, I suppose would be a better way of putting it, right? I'm thinking of the centaurs, I'm thinking of a certain degree of the house elves, I'm thinking to a certain degree of the goblins, Hagrid even, right? We've got enough information now to gather that Hagrid isn't entirely human. That seems to be consistent too. So we do tend to treat creatures which are races which are almost human, but not quite as very virtuous, or as at least potentially very virtuous in the frame of Harry Potter. Yeah, interesting. All right, good. Oh, yeah, Sturm und Drang. L'Hôpital is calling out Sturm und Drang are German words. Yes. Oh, what are we getting? We're getting the Durmstrang. Yeah, Goblin says Durmstrang always sounds like faux German to me. Yeah, no. Durmstrang comes from Sturm und Drang. It comes from the German phrase meaning lightning and thunder, I suppose. It's like drama and turmoil and conflict and all of these things. So it's just the inversion of that. So it is Germanic. It is possible, I suppose, that Durmstrang is in northern Germany. That would be appropriate with the naming convention, at least. But yeah, I'm not at all sure. Yeah, good. Okay. Let's keep moving on. Yeah, Wagner is Marshall's calling out Wagner there. Good. Okay. Let me move on here. And so we've got our arrival of the Beauxbatons kids, and we're going to spend just a little longer with Madame Maxime because I can't leave her behind just yet. Dumbledore started to clap. The students following his lead broke into applause too, many of them standing on tiptoe the better to look at this woman. Her face relaxed into a gracious smile, and she walked forward toward Dumbledore, extending a glittering hand. Dumbledore, though tall himself, had barely to bend to kiss it.
My dear Madame Maxime, he said, welcome to Hogwarts. Dumbledore, said Madame Maxime in a deeper voice, I hope I find you well. In excellent form, I thank you, said Dumbledore. My pupils, said Madame Maxime, waving one of her enormous hands carelessly behind her. Harry, whose attention had been focused completely upon Madame Maxime, now noticed that there were about a dozen boys and girls, all by the look of them in their late teens, had emerged from the carriage and were now standing behind Madame Maxime. They were shivering, which was unsurprising, given that their robes seemed to be made of fine silk, and none of them were wearing cloaks. A few had wrapped scarves and shawls around their heads. From what Harry could see of them, they were standing in Madame Maxime's enormous shadow. They were staring up at Hogwarts with apprehensive looks on their faces. Has Karkaroff arrived yet? Madame Maxime asked. He should be here any moment, said Dumbledore. Would you like to wait here and greet him, or would you prefer to step inside and warm up a trifle? Warm up, I think, said Madame Maxime. But the says, our care of magical creatures, teacher, will be delighted to take care of them, said Dumbledore, the moment he has returned from dealing with the slight situation that has arisen with some of his other, charges. Scroots, Ron muttered to Harry, grinning. Misdeeds require forceful handling, said Madame Maxime, looking as though she doubted whether any care of magical creatures teacher at Hogwarts could be up to the job. They are very strong. I assure you that Hagrid will be well up to the job, said Dumbledore, smiling. Very well, said Madame Maxime, bowing slightly. Will you please inform this Hagrid that the horses drink only single malt whiskey? It will be attended to, said Dumbledore, also bowing. The care of the horses, of course, a specific point of comparison. Okay, two specific points of comparison between Madame Maxime and Hagrid. The height, obviously, naturally, the excessive non-human height, and the love of the horses, the care and attention that she shows to the horses here. I love the completely inconsequential detail that they only drink single malt whiskey. This is very good. Like, I'm thrilled by this. Why do French magical winged horses only drink single malt whiskey? That's a lovely thing. I'm sure that they'll enjoy their time here in Scotland. So we get the arrival of the Beauxbatons kids here, the Beauxbatons delegation. A dozen boys and girls, all by the look of them in their late teens, had emerged from the carriage and were now standing behind Madame Maxime. They were shivering, which was unsurprising, given that their robes seemed to be made of fine silk. So we get here, we're establishing the first set of data points, which we will use to contrast with Durmstrang when they arrive. So we've got silk, and we've got the fact that they are clearly more accustomed to a warmer climate, that they are chilly here, that they are opulent, that they are well-mannered and well-formed, that they are looking up at Hogwarts with apprehensive looks. So they're kind of, they're nervous and they're somewhat on the back foot, but there is a regality here to their appearance. All of this will be inverted. Even the fact that they descend from the sky is going to be roughly inverted when we get to Durmstrang. The lake! Yelled Lee Jordan, pointing down at it. Look at the lake! From their position at the top of the lawns overlooking the grounds, they had a clear view of the smooth black surface of the water, except that the surface was suddenly not smooth at all. Some disturbance was taking place in the center. Great bubbles were forming on the surface. Waves were now washing over the muddy banks. And then, out in the very middle of the lake, a whirlpool appeared, as if a giant plug had just been pulled out of the lake's floor. What seemed to be a long black pole began to rise slowly out of the heart of the whirlpool. And then Harry saw the rigging. It's a mast, he said to Ron and Hermione. Slowly, magnificently, the ship rose out of the water, gleaming in the moonlight. It had a strangely skeletal look about it, as though it were a resurrected wreck, and the dim, misty lights shimmering on its portholes looked like ghostly eyes. Finally, with a great sloshing noise, the ship emerged entirely, bobbing on the turbulent water, and began to glide toward the bank. A few moments later, they heard the splash of an anchor being thrown down in the shadows, and the thud of a plank being lowered onto the bank. People were disembarking. They could see their silhouettes passing the lights in the ship's portholes. All of them, Harry noticed, seemed to be built along the lines of Crabbe and Goyle. But then as they drew nearer, walking up the lawns into the light streaming from the entrance hall, he saw that their bulk was really due to the fact they were wearing cloaks of some kind of shaggy, matted fur. But the man who was leading them up to the castle was wearing furs of a different sort, sleek and silver, like his hair. Dumbledore, he called heartily as he walked up the slope. How are you, my dear fellow? How are you? Blooming, thank you, Professor Karkaroff, Dumbledore replied. Oh, Magical Me is calling out that their thin robes mirror late 18th century fashion. That's a very good pull. Yes, again, speaking to that notion of, right, the court of King Louis, right? We're getting this sense of Versailles at its height, this absolute opulent French aesthetic, contrasted here sharply with Durmstrang. So where the Beauxbatons kids are in fine silks that are flimsy and thin to the cold night air of Hogwarts at the end of October, so the Durmstrang kids are wrapped in heavy fur, shaggy matted fur, animalistic rather than civil. We're drawing a sharp kind of society versus the wilderness division here. As noted, the Beauxbatons kids descend from the sky. The Durmstrang kids ascend from the depths of the lake here. We're drawing as many comparisons, as many hard contrasts, in fact, as we can between these two groups. Raven Darkholm absolutely confirming my perspective on this. In my head, Karkaroff just looks like Christopher Lee as Saruman. 100% true. The movie version of Karkaroff has done absolutely nothing to diminish that perspective for me. I think you're so right. Yes. Nikki saying the ship is so mysterious. You know, it has so many tales to tell. You're absolutely right. I think that, so there's partly that mystery, right? The descending of the winged horses and the coach, this is from fairy tale. This is, I mean, the existence of horse-drawn coaches at all now feels terribly fairy tale, but particularly when they're powder blue with gold trim and accents, right? That is absolutely like a Walt Disney early 20th century version of a fairy tale coach. The Durmstrang kids arrive aboard their ship, and this is a horror ship, right? This is a terrible pirate adventure ship. This is the sunken wreck that rises again with ghost pirates. This is some Pirates of the Caribbean stuff that's happening here. So it's not just the descent of the Beauxbatons kids and the ascent of the Durmstrang kids. We're doing much more deeply thematic things here. Even the crash of the horses coming to Earth, right? And then followed by the coach immediately thereafter is intense and striking and deafening and drives the children back. What do we get from the Durmstrang kids, though? We get the similar sounds are deployed. A few moments later, they heard the splash of an anchor being thrown down in the shallows and the thud of a plank being lowered onto the bank. A splash and a thud. Like, that's not impressive. That's not opulent. That's not orchestral in the way that the arrival of the Beauxbatons kids was. The Durmstrang delegation is something else entirely. We're just really leaning into the idea that there's a sharp conflict between these two things. Yeah, good. Oh, Leo Bill is dodging out. That's fine. You know what? Have a good night, Leo. I know these things run awfully late depending on your time zone, but thank you so much for joining us for the first half. Yeah, good. C-Star's not sure about the horror idea. I think, yeah, no, it's tying back to this kind of not in horror stories, but these are horrific elements within other kinds of fairy tale stories. I suppose that's a better way of putting it, is that the Beauxbatons arrival speaks to the most wondrous and beautiful form of fairy tales, whereas the Durmstrang arrival speaks to the most decrepit and ghoulish form of fairy tales, right? I suppose they're both within that tradition, but very differently inclined. It's not just that they are elementally inclined. It's certainly not just that they are directionally differently inclined, but there is something deeper and thematic happening here between these two schools. We're already primed to view Madame Maxime and Karkaroff very, very differently here. Even the use of titles. Madame Maxime is, of course, motherly. That is more genteel than Professor Maxime. But of course, Professor Karkaroff. We get the starker, more masculine form of this for Karkaroff. Okay, let me keep pushing onward here. Interesting. Yeah, Joseph saying, I wonder how much of Harry seeing them as Crabbe and Goylish is based on his prior assumptions about Durmstrang. That's a really interesting point. Yeah, I think arguably some of that, right? Because his connection to Durmstrang has only been up to this point Draco Malfoy, I suppose, right? And some vague hints and speculation, but that's been pretty much it. So I think that's a very strong connection. Yeah. Michelle, yes, Michelle calling out a really great call here, because of course we already have elemental associations within the world of Harry Potter. The descent from the air of the Beauxbatons kids, well, that is how Ravenclaws show up, you guys. And the ascent out of the water, that's Slytherin. We're already cued to see this sharp distinction, and we've talked before about that interesting that interesting elemental opposition that is
I could talk at great length about the elemental oppositions. I have talked in the past already about the elemental oppositions at the heart of the four houses of Hogwarts. I find them absolutely fascinating that Slytherin and Ravenclaw are in the traditional sense opposed. That's really interesting. Well, or in a traditional sense, right? Depending on whether you follow the Greek tradition or the Roman tradition. Sometimes air is opposed with water. Sometimes water is opposed with fire, right? Which also works within the span of Hogwarts too, and albeit a different way. Yeah. Good. Okay. Let me see here. Yeah, good. Okay. Let's keep pushing ever onward because Durmstrang, more like, Crumstrang. Am I right? I'm not right. I'm getting his autograph if I can, said Ron. You haven't got a quill, have you, Harry? No, they're upstairs in my bag, said Harry. They walked over to the Gryffindor table and sat down. Ron took care to sit on the side facing the doorway because Krum and his fellow Durmstrang students were still gathered around it, apparently unsure about where they should sit. The students from Beauxbatons had chosen seats at the Ravenclaw table. They were looking around the great hall with glum expressions on their faces. 3 of them were still clutching scarves and shawls around their heads. It's not that cold, said Hermione defensively. Why didn't they bring cloaks? Over here! Come and sit over here, Ron hissed. Over here! Hermione, budge up, make a space. What? Too late, said Ron bitterly. Victor Krum and his fellow Durmstrang students had settled themselves at the Slytherin table. Harry could see Malfoy, Crabbe, and Goyle looking very smug about this. As he watched, Malfoy went forward to speak to Krum. Yeah, that's right. Smarm him up, Malfoy, said Ron scathingly. I bet Krum can see right through him, though. Bet he gets people fawning over him all the time. Where do you reckon they're going to sleep? We could offer him a space in our dormitory, Harry. I wouldn't mind giving him my bed. I could kip on a camp bed. The minor hypocrisy of Ron Weasley there is somewhat charming. Yes, smarm him up, Malfoy. But you could definitely have my bed. I'm just so super into you. It's pretty cute. And here again, right, we get the codification of exactly what we were just talking about. The emphasis of this, that the Beauxbatons students are going to ally themselves with Ravenclaw, and the Durmstrang students are going to align themselves, if not outright ally themselves, with Slytherin. And hey, isn't that interesting? Because isn't there now a sense in which the Triwizard Tournament, which, minor spoilers, is actually going to have 4 champions this year, has 1 champion from each house. This is, if we're drawing this connection consistently, then we get full representation of the Hogwarts houses within the frame of the Triwizard Tournament. Joseph saying, oh, great, another chance to watch Krum do stuff. All the other Durmstrang students. Yes, I like that. Good. Okay. This is interesting. Rahit says Hermione's reaction here is a little out of character. I'm assuming because she feels threatened by the women. Is that the intention? Yes, I think so. And I think of this I think this is the case for 2 reasons. I see Hermione's response as being fundamentally different to Ron's response, right? Ron is jealous of Hermione's support for, any handsome boy who comes along. Ultimately, of course, we're going to be talking about Victor Krum in that context too. But Hermione's response to the girls here does seem powerful. It seems emotionally true, but there is a space opened up to allow us to speculate about whether or not it is completely under her control. And we're kind of right here in the middle. In fact, let's do the next slide and then we can talk about it, because we're going to be talking a little about the villa. At that moment, a voice says, "Excuse me, are you wanting the bouillabaisse?" It was the girl from Beauxbatons who had laughed during Dumbledore's speech. She had finally removed her muffler. A long sheet of silvery blonde hair fell almost to her waist. She had large, deep blue eyes and very white, even teeth. Ron went purple. He stared up at her, opened his mouth to reply, but nothing came out except a faint gurgling noise. Yeah, have it, said Harry, pushing the dish toward the girl. You have finished with it? Yeah, Ron said breathlessly. Yeah, it was excellent. The girl picked up the dish and carried it carefully off to the Ravenclaw table. Ron was still goggling at the girl as though he'd never seen one before. Harry started to laugh. The sound seemed to jog Ron back to his senses. She's a feeler, he said hoarsely to Harry. Of course she isn't, said Hermione tartly. I don't see anyone else gaping at her like an idiot. But she wasn't entirely right about that. As the girl crossed the hall, many boys' heads turned, and some of them seemed to have become temporarily speechless, just like Ron. I'm telling you, that's not a normal girl, said Ron, leaning sideways so he could keep a clear view of her. They don't make them like that at Hogwarts. They make them okay at Hogwarts, said Harry, without thinking. Cho happened to be sitting only a few places away from the girl with the silvery hair. When you have both put your eyes back in, said Hermione briskly, you'll be able to see who's just arrived. She was pointing up at the staff table. The 2 remaining empty seats had just been filled. Ludo Bagman was now sitting on Professor Karkaroff's other side, while Mr. Crouch, Percy's boss, was next to Madame Maxime. So minor arrival of Ludo Bagman and Barty Crouch there. More on them later. This is Fleur Delacour. Is Fleur Delacour a Vila? Well, okay. Again, I don't want to jump ahead to the actual conclusion that the story is going to give us, right? I don't want to wait on the story's confirmation or necessarily to allow the story to supersede our own interpretation, because the truth is that any interpretation of Fleur as she appears here will at least speak to the possibility that she is Vila or part Vila, which is what I'm talking about when I talk about a response from Hermione that is less emotionally anchored and potentially at least more magically anchored. And I'm saying this because, of course, we've already had one interaction with the Vila back at the Quidditch World Cup, which, boy, howdy, feels like a million years ago, doesn't it? A lot has happened in the wizarding world since then. A lot has happened to Harry and Ron and Hermione. We've passed a long way into the book from those initial experiences, but you'll remember that it was Hermione who was left unresponsive by the Vila's performance. Apparently, it is something that is targeted exclusively at men, which opens up some complicated sexual politics, at least, right? Okay, not to put too fine a point on it, but if there are gay or bisexual girls in attendance at Hogwarts, which statistically there almost certainly are they attracted to the Vila? Or is this something that is preserved for men? Are gay men attracted to the Vila, right? And within the frame of like fairy tradition here, both of these answers are potentially true or potentially resonant, I suppose. It may be that the Vila are heightening their latent sexual allure, in which case anyone who would be sexually interested in someone who looks like a Vila is just going to be more sexually attracted to someone who are, and I'm using sexual here as a shorthand, it isn't just about sexual attraction, it is about enchantment, it is about the glamour, right, in the elven fairy sense rather than the somewhat diminished modern sense of the word. So is it the case that people who are already apt to be attracted to Fleur are more attracted to Fleur because of this Vila influence? Maybe. Or is it the case that people who are male are going to be attracted to Fleur regardless of their personal tastes and proclivities? Maybe. There are versions of both kinds of story in the fairy tale tradition, and we just don't have enough information to go on right now. What we can say definitively is that Hermione is not moved by the appearance of the Vila back at the Quidditch World Cup or by Fleur here. This is something very different. And Hermione's response is potentially at least magically inclined. Let me see here. Tartly, says Michelle Shocked, is an interesting adjective to describe Hermione. It implies some bitterness. No, it absolutely does. When you both put your eyes back in, said Hermione briskly, you'll be able to see just who's arrived, right? She's not swayed by interesting, right? Of course she isn't, said Hermione tartly. I don't see anyone else gaping at her like an idiot looking at Harry, who is looking at Cho Chang, right? This is not a great moment for Hermione looking for emotional support, but yeah. Corporeal says, I'm a bit uncomfortable with just equating Vila with beauty. There's an element of control, of removal of will theme that comes from the old fairy tradition. Yes, no, this is not to suggest that it is just because they are beautiful. It is because they are magically beautiful. It is because they are literally enchanting. They are literally glamorous, right? These are the oldest forms of folkloric magic that we acknowledge in our shared narrative and literary traditions here. The ability to ensorcel and to enchant, that seems to be resonant with what we see here of the Vila, at least. But yeah, it's interesting. Natalie Dormer is definitely a Vila, says Marshall. Can confirm. Yeah. Raven Darkholm suggesting that, first off. Yeah, good. Excellent. All right. Yeah, and it is telling that the chat scroll for the first time all evening. The chat scrolled when I didn't want it to. Let me see if I can find that thought here. Yeah, C-Star saying, interesting that Harry isn't particularly stunned by Fleur as Ron is. Absolutely true, right? But then, arguably, Harry wasn't as taken by the Vila as Ron was back then. And Harry is, of course, looking at his own source of enchantment, his own source of ensorcelment right there. Yes, good, okay. Yeah, and Ryan calling out, they don't make them like that at Hogwarts is basically another way of saying you're not as pretty as she is. Yeah, I've never seen a woman as beautiful as Fleur Delacour. Sorry, Hermione, I know you're sitting here, but come on now. Let's be reasonable. Let's be rational. Yeah. Good. Okay.
Joseph, that's a really interesting thought. Wow. Joseph asks the same reason he isn't susceptible to Imperio. My immediate inclination is no, because the narrative by implication credits Cho Chang, right? The narrative has, they make them okay at Hogwarts, said Harry without thinking. Cho happened to be sitting only a few places away from the girl with the silvery hair. So as Harry is watching Fleur walk across, though even then, right, we get the, have it, said Harry, pushing the dish toward the girl. You have finished, was it? Yeah, said Ron breathlessly. Yes, it was excellent. Harry doesn't seem particularly charmed by Fleur right from the jump. Is that because he's just more into Cho Chang? Is that what's happening right now? Maybe, but maybe there is an innate resilience. Maybe there is something about the power of the viewer having somewhat less significant influence over Harry. Yeah, interesting. Okay, more on that later. Let's get to the Goblet of Fire itself and the introduction of the rules of the game here. The instructions for the tasks the champions will face this year have already been examined by Mr. Crouch and Mr. Bagman, said Dumbledore, as Filch placed the chest carefully on the table before him, and they have made the necessary arrangements for each challenge. There will be 3 tasks spaced throughout the school year, and they will test the champions in many different ways. Their magical prowess, their daring, their powers of deduction, and of course, their ability to cope with danger. At this last word, the hall was filled with a silence so absolute that nobody seemed to be breathing. As you know, 3 champions compete in the tournament, Dumbledore went on calmly, 1 from each of the participating schools. They will be marked on how well they perform each of the tournament tasks, and the champion will be the highest total after task. The champion with the highest total after task 3 will win the Triwizard Cup. The champions will be chosen by an impartial selector, the Goblet of Fire. Dumbledore now took out his wand and tapped 3 times on the top of the casket. The lid creaked slowly open. Dumbledore reached inside it and pulled out a large, roughly hewn wooden cup. It would have been entirely unremarkable had it not been full to the brim with dancing blue-white flames. Dumbledore closed the casket and placed the goblet carefully on top of it, where it would be clearly visible to everyone in the hall. Anybody wishing to submit themselves as champion must write their name and school clearly upon a slip of parchment and drop it into the goblet, said Dumbledore. Aspiring champions have 24 hours in which to put their names forward. Tomorrow night, Halloween, the goblet will return the names of the 3 it has judged most worthy to represent their schools. The goblet will be placed in the entrance hall tonight, where it will be freely accessible to all those wishing to compete. To ensure that no underage student yields to temptation, said Dumbledore, I will be drawing an age line around the Goblet of Fire once it has been placed in the entrance hall. Nobody under the age of 17 will be able to cross this line. Finally, I wish to impress upon any of you wishing to compete that this tournament is not to be entered into lightly. Once a champion has been selected by the Goblet of Fire, he or she is obliged to see the tournament through to the end. The placing of your name in the goblet constitutes a binding magical contract. There can be no change of heart once you have become a champion. Please be very sure, therefore, that you are wholeheartedly prepared to play before you drop your name into the goblet. Now I think it is time for bed. Good night to you all. So we get our introduction of the eponymous Goblet of Fire, and the Goblet of Fire itself is really interesting as an anchor point for the entire book, because this is certainly, to date, the least significant artifact or object which has given its name to the title of a Harry Potter book. Okay, Harry Potter and the Philosopher's Stone. The Philosopher's Stone plays a vital part in the course of that story. Chamber of Secrets, yeah, the chamber pretty significant, actually, as it turns out. Prisoner of Azkaban, yeah, he's quite important. Goblet of Fire could be replaced with practically anything else and not change the shape of this story one whit. Except that when it's revealed here, it reminds me that this is the cup of a carpenter. It would have been entirely unremarkable had it not been full to the brim with dancing blue-white flames. This roughly hewn wooden cup. I always wonder, and I've never actually seen this addressed anywhere, but I always wonder if this is a direct reference to the Holy Grail as it's presented in the frame of Indiana Jones and the Last Crusade, one of my favorite movies of all time. So this is how it's going to go down. Everyone has to submit their names. Everyone has to put their names and their school into the goblet. The goblet, this impartial selector, the mechanism of which we are never completely made familiar with. The goblet is going to pick the 3 champions who are going to compete in the 3 tasks spaced throughout the school year, which have been set up by Mr. Crouch and Mr. Bagman. So Dumbledore tells us. Right.
And Harry has, Spatula McGrady calling out, Harry has been through 3 challenges, well, 3+ challenges, but Harry has overcome 3 challenges already. Yeah, it's pretty good. Raven saying, I like that the goblet here does appear unremarkable. It plays nicely with the port key. No, I love the physical mundanity of the goblet is actually beautiful. I really love that as a symbol at the heart of the book. I'm just surprised that it is, I don't really understand why it is Harry Potter and the Goblet of Fire versus Harry Potter and the Triwizard Tournament, or some kind of equally evocative phrase. I'm just not sure, but I really do like it. Yeah, good. Yes, Joseph saying what Dumbledore means to say is that nobody under the age of 17 will be able to cross the line without consequence. Yeah, the security system set up around the Goblet of Fire is not completely narratively comprehensible, right? The idea that painting an age line around the goblet makes it completely impossible for any other name to be entered into the contest is weird. It's weird. I mean, any upperclassman at Hogwarts can put any name they want into the Goblet of Fire, can put multiple names into the Goblet of Fire, right? There's nothing stopping Cedric Diggory from writing out the name of every single Hufflepuff kid and throwing it into the Goblet of Fire. I mean, of course, Cedric Diggory wouldn't do that because he's Hufflepuff, but there's nothing stopping some Slytherin kid from doing that. It's not perfect, but it gets us where we need to go. So we can forgive Dumbledore this one indulgence. I did want to call out too, there will be 3 tasks, Dumbledore says, spaced throughout the school year, and they will test the champions in many different ways, many different ways, to pick, let's say, 4 different ways at random. Their magical prowess, their daring, their powers of deduction, and of course, their ability to cope with danger. Their daring and their ability to cope with danger is interesting, because daring is directly applicable to courage, right? It is directly, and of course, the direction that I'm moving here is, hey, he kind of calls out the virtues of the 4 Hogwarts houses right here. Their magical prowess, we can connect that to Slytherin, right? The idea of power and the desire for power is absolutely a Slytherin trait. Their powers of deduction, clearly Ravenclaw. Their daring, their courage, clearly Gryffindor. But he concludes with their ability to cope with danger. Not to confront danger or to overcome danger, which might speak to other virtues more suited to other houses, but their ability to cope with danger, their steadfastness, their indefatigability. This is a Hufflepuff quality. He's calling out Hufflepuff there at the end. Their magical prowess is Slytherin, their daring is Gryffindor, their powers of deduction is Ravenclaw, and of course their ability to cope with danger seems to me, at least to my reading, to be a Hufflepuff quality. What do you guys make of that? Am I reading too much into this? I'm just not sure. Oh, Jessa asking, would you compare the 3 tasks to the ethos, pathos, and logos? I'm brand new. This is my first time being in the live chat. Welcome, Jessa. I'm so glad to have you with us. I had given that not one moment's thought. I absolutely will give that thought. Because what's interesting is that though we lean very hard on this idea, it's called the Triwizard Tournament, right? We're going to do 3 tasks through the course of the year. We're going to have 3 challengers competing in these tasks. It's focused on 3s, but we immediately break that schema there by adding in Harry. So we move back to a much more Hogwarts traditional 4-tier structure or 4-class structure, I suppose. So I hadn't given it a lot of thought in that regard, but we will think of that as we move forward. That's really, really interesting. Thank you for that. Yeah. Yes, Rahit saying their ability to cope with danger, is that a way to say their character, which you can mark out as Hufflepuffs? Hufflepuff has a lot of character. Yes, absolutely. Absolutely. I think that's really fascinating. And we're going to see, because our contestants are going to interact with these challenges and manifest different virtues in different ways as we move forward, we're excuse me, we're going to be able to keep track of that pretty carefully as we move through the rest of the book. Gosh, Actual Mia suggesting as a title for the book, Harry Potter and the Break from the Rule of Threes. Yes. Harry Potter and the Breaking of Rules, in fact, would be a pretty good name for Goblet of Fire. I like that a lot. Good. Okay. Yes. C-Star asking, what happens if someone tries to break the contract? Don't know. Like, at what point is the contract official? It's just the entering of the name into the Goblet of Fire. So if you enter your name into the goblet and the goblet selects someone else's name, are you still bound in any kind of contractual sense to be, I don't know, representative of your house, representative of your school? Is there still an element of investment there? we kind of just hand wave all of this, really. We don't delve too deep into it, but yeah. Yes, excuse me. Spatula McGrady asking, would the sorting hat not be a formidable chooser? Well, yeah, that's a nice idea. I like the idea that we could kind of co-opt something that's a pre-existing part of the Harry Potter universe. Yeah, I like that idea very much. Good. All right, here's what we're going to do, you guys, because I'm terribly sorry about this, but my throat is actually packing up on me as I'm doing this, as you can tell by the awful coughs that I'm yielding to. So what we're going to do, I think, is wrap it up there. We're just a few minutes early, and we're at a nice breaking point because we're now going to move into the discussion of Karkaroff and Moody. So I think what we'll do is draw a veil over this a little early tonight. Let me cancel this slide and come back to you here. Jolly good. Okay, we got some quick questions. Let me see if I can run through these in short order, and then we'll wrap it up and we'll pick up with the rest of the slides next week. When Moody uses Imperio on Neville, asks Actuomia, he's able to complete physical tasks he usually could not. Is this because Neville is so susceptible to suggestion he could become somewhat superhuman under another's command? I think it's actually the inverse of that. My reading of that would be the inverse of that, that actually Neville is incredibly capable, but is limited by his own sense of that capability. And when he is freed from self-doubt by the rigor of the Imperius curse, he's actually capable of doing tremendous things. That would be my reading of it. But yeah, your mileage may definitely vary. And yeah, good. Corporeal pointing out coordination is of the mind as well as the body. Neville's just so insecure, says Nikki. Yeah, I think Nikki, you and I are on the same page there. Excuse me. Heroes and Bards asks, knowing what we know about Moody, why do we think he decided teaching Harry to fight the Imperius curse was a good idea? Well, not to jump ahead to the conclusion, but he does say they'll have trouble controlling you. He doesn't at any point say, well, you're safe, Harry, right? He doesn't seem to be assuring Harry or assuring the reader that Harry will actually be able to face the Imperius curse without danger or without threat. So I'm not entirely while I see the point that you're making there, Heroes and Bards, and kind of yeah, it is possible that within this frame Harry may learn a trick or two that will allow him to fight back against the Imperius curse in due course. That doesn't seem to be quite where we're at. They will have trouble controlling you is not the same as, well, you're pretty strong. And of course, knowing that Harry can innately fight the Imperius curse is important knowledge too. Yeah. Katie asks, is the amount of will to overcome the Imperius curse related to the will of the person putting the curse on you? I'm going to say yes. I'm going to say yes because of two factors. Well, okay, yeah, because of two factors that we've got so far. The first is the basic idea, the basic assumption that the force of will which underpins a spell is actually terribly significant, right? We think that the clearest example of this, I suppose, is the Expecto Patronum, the use of Expecto Patronum back in Prisoner of Azkaban. The more willful you are, the more likely you are to cast the spell correctly and to have that spell be more powerful. And that also seems to be true of the curses. And it does seem to be engaged in, or it does seem to be dependent upon some kind of war of wills there. Yes. Guys, I am sorry. I'm going to have to wrap it up there. My throat is not going to allow me to force my way through any other additional questions. I'm terribly sorry for that. But let's all meet together next week. Let me skip ahead here so that I can tell you what we're going to cover next week. Next week, we are going to cover, in theory at least, the Goblet of Fire, Chapter 16. We're going to cover the Four Champions, Chapter 17, and the Weighing of the Wands, Chapter 18. That's a lot of material. We probably won't get through all three chapters, but we will at least get through the Goblet of Fire and the Four Champions next week. That will take place at 10 p.m. Eastern, 9 p.m. Central, February 20th. That's next Tuesday night at the usual evening time. Thank you all so much for joining me this evening. I'm sorry if my voice has been completely unbearable to listen to. I'm going to go and have a lozenge and maybe some hot tea, and all will be well. And I will talk to you all again very soon. Thank you for your time. Thank you for your attention. Thank you for your brilliance. I'll see you all again soon. Until then, mischief managed. Good night, all.